Thank you, Chairman Bass, and thank you for calling this hearing, which is so important. My state of Tennessee, and particularly my city of Memphis, which is most germane to me, heavily impacted by poverty and by violent crime. A recent study by the Violence Policy Center cites that Tennessee has one of the highest rates of homicide of black victims in the nation, and that African Americans are disproportionately reported as victims of homicide. In Tennessee, there were 323 black homicide victims in 2016, and 87% of them died after being shot. Nationwide, in 2016, although African Americans only represent 13% of the population, homicide of black residents made up 51% of all respondents and reports. This is an epidemic that has long-term implications. Local publication in Memphis, the Daily Memphian, which is online, but it's kind of in lieu of a daily newspaper, or in addition thereto, I guess, recently published a 3-part series on the impact constant stress and trauma have on the brains of young people. Research showed that prolonged stress and trauma can impair the normal development of a child's brain and erode a child's immune system. Children who experience chronic stress, trauma, and adverse childhood experiences become more prone to violence, aggression, depression, substance addiction, suicide, illness, and disease, not to mention academic failure. There's a definite need for more federal resources to help combat this issue. And at this time, I'd like to introduce that Daily Memphian report to the City and the Violence Policy Center report, as well as the Commercial report on wounded civilians.
Without objection.
Thank you. I introduced H.R. 3738, the Safer Streets Act, which would create a new grant program to help reduce violent crime in our communities. Specifically, the act would provide grants to units of local government that have the crime rates twice the national rate. 50% of the grant funding would be reserved for units of local governments with crime rates 4 times the national average. 20% would go to units of local government with crime rates 3 times the national average, and 10% to those with crime rates twice the national rate. I think it makes sense to put the money where the problem is. The remaining funding would be reserved for emergency grants to help address spikes in violent crime. It's unfortunate, I read yesterday that one of the bills that I voted for in this committee and was kind of proud to do because I had to overcome my resistance to voting for something that the proponents of were not my favorites, but you try to do what's right, and that was the First Step Act. And then I read that the leader said that he didn't want to use it in his campaigns, it was a loser, and that he regretted somewhat him being behind it because he hadn't got the credit he deserved. And the people who liked it, like Van Jones, liked him for a day and then didn't like him afterwards. We need to be doing things that address these problems and not worry about somebody kissing your shoes or kissing your posterior or patting you on the head. And that's a problem we've got in this country. Mr. Moore, let me ask you, if states and localities were given more federal funding, how would you recommend it be spent to truly help solve this?
And thank you. And I want to also underscore that Wisconsin has the 2nd highest black homicide victimization rate, which I think is highlighted in one of the reports you presented from the Violence Policy Center. So this is a racial justice issue as well, particularly as it relates to funding public health approaches to violence prevention. One of the things that could be supported is 4-1 for Life, as an example. We need all of the support that we can get from that, both from the local level, the state level, but also if there are federal resources that could support training and engaging folks in conflict mediation and de-escalation, which it seems like there's agreement for that among this panel. That is something that could substantially help. I also want to underscore on the prevention side, because I see that more on the intervention. On the prevention side is also funding after school. When you look at cuts to the 21st century community learning centers, funding those types of programs are also important. Youth employment is also an area of focus that should be strengthened as well.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Moore, and I may be presumptive here because of where you're from, but are you going to be for the Brewers or the Nats?
The Brewers all day.
Well, I hope you have an awful October the 1st. I yield back the balance of my time.